Buddy, we're all here. So let's record attendance first. Mr. Dimming may be a little late.
Here.
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 Present.
Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Visitor comments?
Thank you. I want to request that we express disagreements respectfully. I wasn't sure if I heard something correctly at the last board meeting, so I went back and listened to the archive when I got home, and it was said, grooming is the first step predators use, and it often includes keeping sensitive information from parents, and educators being taught parents are bad guys. Students are being taught parents are the bad guys. While it's true that predators and groomers keep secrets, it's not conversely true that everyone that keeps secrets are groomers and predators. Comparing our hardworking staff to groomers and predators is insulting, insensitive, and inaccurate. Surely all of us in this room have kept secrets of some sort about something. Presidents have top secrets. Proverbs says a trustworthy person keeps a secret. So I will not compare anyone in this room to a predator. It's an offensive comparison. It was said on national news that Southern Lehigh educators are teaching children to keep secrets like predators do. I didn't do that as a teacher, but I asked around to be sure. Maybe other teachers think parents are enemies. I did an informal survey and asked teachers, do you encourage or promote students to keep secrets or important information from their parents? Not surprisingly, 100% said no. They also wanted me to share their thoughts. Educators said an emphatic no, never. Sometimes going to the counselor might give them confidence and skills to talk to their parents if they felt they couldn't before. On the contrary, I encourage children to go home and tell their parents all we do in class. I let them know that they can always talk to me, but I also mention to them about talking to an adult family member. I know of no teacher who teaches students that parents are bad guys. Real groomers and predators would lose their job and go to prison. But the saddest and truest response came from a longtime teacher in the district. I'm paraphrasing. Being labeled a groomer, it's disgusting, but that's the norm for us now. I encourage parents to continue to be involved and active and talk about important issues, but at the same time, I kindly ask that we discourage such harmful and hurtful comparisons when debating such serious topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Reinhardt. Before we get to the library discussion, we want to welcome our library guests. A few quick things first. We know that Veterans Day is coming up on the 11th, so we want to acknowledge our veterans for their service to the community, to the nation. We also have Southern Lehigh High School will perform Mother Hicks coming up on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this week at 7 p.m. at the high school. Mother Hicks, which I've not seen, is a Susan Zedner play. It's a story of an orphan girl and a deaf boy set in Illinois during the Great Depression. So by all accounts, it's going to be a great performance. So we encourage people to get out to see it. Also want to note the exceptional success of our athletic teams. All or nearly all were in the playoffs. We have at least 2 district champions, and as I understand it, perhaps some more to come. And finally, Green Slips will return following parent conferences on November 21st to support the many child care challenges being faced by our parents. We're holding off on Green Slips for play dates until we see how this first rollout works, but we anticipate having those conversations with parents on the 21st and the Green Slips reemerging very shortly thereafter in the coming days. So, Mr. Reiners, that does conclude my presentation, other than to say that there has been, I think, some constructive conversation between the Southern Lehigh School District Board and the Southern Lehigh Community Library Board. The part of that conversation has a number of different aspects to it, and I think both parties thought it would be really good to take some time and have a conversation or a dialogue about mutual concerns. And so with that, I could invite maybe the members of the library board and administrative staff to come forth. I understand you may have a presentation or some discussion to have, and we welcome you. And perhaps you could handle the introductions as we begin. Okay? All right. Thank you. Thank you.
It's working. Good. Good evening. First, we'd like to thank you all for inviting us to meet with you and have a discussion about the Southern Lehigh Public Library. We've come prepared to answer your questions regarding the library, some of which we received over the weekend, so we've been scrambling around to try to get the information for you. If for some reason we've missed an item or don't have the information tonight, we will gladly commit to getting it to you as soon as we possibly can. Let me introduce our group this morning, or this evening. My name is Bruce Ames. I'm the board president. Behind me, I have Lynette Sager, who's our library director. Kathy Parsons, who is our board member and representative from the Southern Lehigh School District on our board. Candy Harmon Cruz, who is a board member and our treasurer. And Mark Sullivan, who's our district consultant librarian. And all of us will be having. Oh, Kat Moyer, I'm sorry. Kat Moyer is a member of our board. We've prepared packets for each of you to refer to, and they're at your place for review. Most of these documents we've sent to you previously in our pre-meeting board packets, but we wanted to make sure you had the information this evening. Kathy's going to review the highlighting of these first.
Until Jeff sits down.
I'd like to note that Mr. Deming has joined the group at 6:40 p.m.
Thank you.
At one of the last board meetings, it was asked how the library got entangled with Lower Saucon Township and their wish to join our library service area. So that's kind of what I'm covering. And in your packet, you'll see these public statements. These were also sent to you as soon as they were made throughout the year. There's a few different ones. So the first one that I have here was on July 19th. And that's when we voted to accept a $50,000 donation from Lower Saucon Township. And we did that not with, as Bruce says here, with serious trepidation. We knew that this was depriving Hellertown Library of funds, but that we felt a fiduciary responsibility to take the money. So we did. And that we did that because the solicitor wrote us a letter that said that there was no strings attached. It was a thank you for services rendered, which, by the way, is something that we do for all libraries. And then in October 7th, we sent another letter out, a public statement. And this is when we gave an update, and it says that there is a formal process that must be followed at a state level for Lower Saucon Township to effectively end its relationship with Hellertown Library and join our service area. And that includes obtaining approval from both the Office of Commonwealth Libraries, that's the OCL, and the Governor's Advisory Council on Library Development. And that's a pretty complicated process, especially because it's over county lines. Libraries don't usually join each other across county lines in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a very localized library system usually. There's like the Bucks County Library System and Chester County Library System. But in our area, we're associated with Allentown and Lehigh County Libraries. So But, and I should say, while this was going on, Bruce was representing the library. Lower Saucon Township never contacted the full library board. We did not talk to them. They only met and Bruce kept on saying, this is between Lower Saucon Township and Hellertown Area Library. This has nothing to do with Southern Lehigh Library until you sever your ties with the other library. And then in November, just November 5th, a week ago, Bruce sent out another email or, okay. So this message is being sent in the direction of the Southern Lehigh Public Library's Board of Directors to Upper Saucon Township, Lower Milford Township, Coopersburg Borough, and the Southern Lehigh School District. And this is us asking everyone, all of our funders, to come to the meeting that we're having. And that will be November 15th, so that we can talk things over. We've been very transparent with the libraries, as far as I know, and we just want everybody connected and to know what's going on. I don't know if that helped. It is confusing. We don't quite know why Lower Saucon and Hellertown decided to part ways. We just know that they want to join us. Okay.
Let me address the 2 points. One is the $50,000 check. We did receive it. We received it with no strings attached, but we were threatened, assumed, or whatever by several of our funders that they were going to cut our funding if we didn't accept the check. That check is still in our account. We've cashed it, but that's it. And to kind of bring you up to date, Hellertown did go to OCL and request that Lower Saucon be taken out of their service area. They haven't gone to the GAC yet, but the state librarian approved their request. We found out in the last few days that Lower Saucon has sent a letter back out to OCL saying, whoops, wait a minute, we didn't really mean that. We don't want them to take us out of their service area. So we're as confused as everybody else is as to really what's going on. I had also had our solicitor send a letter to their solicitor asking them to come to our board meeting, and we'd be glad to meet with them and talk to them. We've not had a response on that yet, and that's been 2 months ago. So that kind of brings up what we're doing at this point.
So I heard that the $50,000 was a donation. Sure.
Okay, that's fine. That works. One of the items that we're looking at strongly at doing is, and I know we're kind of changing steps in the stream here, but one of the things that we're talking about doing and we plan to do is to put a library tax referendum on the ballot next spring. Now, other than to have that interest, we can't do much about it until the midterms are tomorrow, because some of the things that happen at midterms reflects what we can do next spring's millage or next spring's ballots. We're looking for a 2/10 mill referendum. We frankly would like to have the school board work with us on getting it on the ballot. We need some legal entity to put it on the ballot. We have interviewed 5 local libraries that have done this in the past, recently in the past, and every one of them, their statement's the same. It's a lot of work, but at the end of the day, it's well worth the effort.
Goals. I'm going to switch topics now and have Candy come up and talk specifically about our budgeting.
Good evening. Today, first, I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are year to date. The information I'm going to give to you is based off of a fiscal end of September of 2022. We should have October numbers pretty shortly. At 75% through the year, we were at 88% of budgeted amount for income. This was bolstered by the fact that we get our state aid once a year. the fact that we have that $50,000 donation from Lower Saucon Township, as well as an increase in our book sale room and our meeting room rentals this year. From the operating expense side, we were at 70% of budget, so just slightly below budget, partially bolstered by the fact that we've struggled to hire personnel this year. So we're a little bit behind on our personnel expenses, though was raised by the fact, I think there was a question around legal fees in our budget. We generally are not a very litigious population. We normally budget somewhere between $200 and $400 a year. With the situation with Lower Saucon Township, we've already spent $10,000 this year in legal fees. So we assume that this will continue, unfortunately. As far as next year's budget, this will be a conversation at our board meeting on the 15th. We have prepared two options so far, one looking at it as our current service area, as well as that of adding Lower Saucon Township. The proposed budget that's been in previous package basically stays the same. The only thing that's changed is we had a slight change to our state funding. So now the deficit is $28,297 based off of current service area versus the previous was around $28,400. There was also a question around the option 2 of what happens if Lower Saucon Township joins. There was a question around why we had removed school board funding. There was a conversation, and I was not part of it, where there was a concern that if we added another funder, that it might be a way for the school board to not need to provide funding. What we found is that is not the case. Based off of a similar per capita of Upper Saucon Township, for Lower Saucon Township, our deficit actually increases. Even if Southern Lehigh School District would maintain their funding, our deficit would go from $28,297 to $85,079. And I'm going to turn it. Bruce, are you handling additional questions?
I realize we're kind of skipping around here, but we did have a plan, and we are following it. So I want to talk about strategic plan for just a second. We did hire an outside company to work with this, and I think some of you met with these folks during our discovery session. They presented to our last board meeting their findings, and they're in the process of putting that all together. So when we get together on December 6th, we can start the process of building our strategic plan. This is something we should have done a while ago. We were woefully behind on it. And then we got caught up in this Lower Saucon Hellertown thing. And, you know, our focus has been kind of off of that. So, so the 5-year, one of the questions was, do we have a 5-year plan? Right now, we don't have a 5-year plan. That will come out of the strategic plan. So, and again, I come out of the corporate world, so I totally understand strategic planning and 5-year planning. And as Lynette mentioned, we'll have this, we should have this done first quarter of 2023. We'll be glad to share it with you. You're also invited to come to our December 6th meeting. If you have any input into our strategic plan, that would be great. One of the questions that we got, we already talked about the tax referendum. One of the questions we got is who are our primary funding sources? Obviously, Southern Lehigh School District, Upper Saucon Township, Lower Milford Township, and Coopersburg Borough. In addition, we do receive some state funding, and we do have some fundraising activities, like our recent, you've seen the signs all over the township, the Read Between the Wines thing that we raised about $15,000 net to the library on that 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that was great. And we also have our Helping Hands campaign, which is going out in the next few weeks to people that have contributed to us in the past. So those are our major funding. We do have some smaller fundraising things, but they might raise $1,000 or $2,000. Another question is, will the library be asking for increased funding over the next 5 years? And I guess my answer to that is I would assume that over 5 years there will be a need to do an increase. Right now we're just looking for level funding. But you know, given what we've had over the last 2 or 3 years with COVID and all that, costs have gone up. We've increased the pay for our staff pretty substantially over the last year or two. So can I sit here and honestly say, no, we're not going to come back and ask for more? I can't. But right now, we're just looking for level funding. Trying to think. How do we measure the number of visitors? We have a people counter at the door, which unfortunately right now is not functioning. So I can't give the number on that, but we're going to get that replaced. But again, as Lynette mentioned earlier, we don't, if a student or a parent or comes into the library, uses something there and leaves and doesn't check a book out or check a tape out or get on a computer, we frankly don't know if they were there or not. For the same reason that DeSales students come in to our library and use it for a resource, but we don't know they were there. So we talked about the Office of Commonwealth Libraries issue with Lower Saucon Township. We're as confused over this as you all are. I had a morning call, writer called me the other day, and he said, "I'd really like to know what's going on and why this happened." And I said, "Well, Tony, if you could come up with the answer to that, call me back and you can print it, because I don't have any idea." Under what conditions will Southern Lehigh Library accept Lower Saucon? We don't, right now, we're not, we've invited them to come and talk to us, but we've not set up any conditions for them to come and do it. We've gone through a serious study of what it would cost if we did this, and it's a pretty substantial number. But at this point, we're not hearing anything from them, so we don't know what the answer to that is. Someone had asked, why not allow Lower Saucon to join for a year trial basis? We talked about that. And the problem is, if you do it on a trial basis, the state doesn't see it that way. The state sees you brought on 11,000 people, you need to add this many staff, this much to your collection. We don't care if it's 12 months or 112 months. That as soon as you do that, you've got to meet these requirements, or then that negatively affects our state funding. So trying to get through all these questions you guys sent. There's a lot of good questions. We talked about the budget. What funding level did we assume from Southern Lehigh School District? Level. Just, we're not asking for any more. We're not asking for any less. We know we're going to, even with your funding, we're still going to have a deficit, but we think that there's a way that we can work through that. Final question we got actually today was, what do we do about volunteers? The question was, do we use volunteers? And the answer is, we have about 30 volunteers, including board members, plus an additional group of 30 core members of the Friends group. We have a great Friends group at the library. If you're not part of it, we'd ask you to join it. But they man our book room. They do a lot of fundraising efforts for us and help us out. They're mostly older, retired folks. There's some students, but they do shelving and shelf reading, book repair, maintain our book sale room, help with fundraising events, shift collections, assisting with weeding. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody else to do that. Collection and assist with children's programming. And I think the other question that came up was, last year we had, and Candy touched on this a little bit, last year we had about $200 in our budget for legal fees. This year it's at $9,800, pushing $10,000 real quick. And that's all because of this Lower Saucon Hellertown issue. We have not retained a solicitor until 2022. And that's because we really didn't need to. But this year we found it was a case that we needed to retain a solicitor to help us through some of the legal things and the state issues and all that. So unfortunately we had to do that and accept that cost. That's all I've got. Questions? This gentleman over here had a question.
So I'd like to understand more about the payment that Lower Saucon gave.
Okay.
And in particular, because I also heard, if I heard it correctly, you're counting that money in your revenue, and that puts you at 80%, but yet you're sitting on those funds because you don't know what may or may not come with you spending that, is what I'm gathering. And I also heard tonight that while it was a donation, it was for services. So what services were tied to that $50,000? And are you currently servicing residents of Lower Saucon when they come into the library? And if so, why and how are you doing that?
Sure. Go ahead.
We have in the state of Pennsylvania a program called Access PA, which is a reciprocal borrowing agreement between participating libraries. So for many years, we have served Lower Saucon residents, as well as Hellertown residents, Bethlehem residents, Bucks County residents, if they come into our library with a home library card, and it has the embedded icon Access PA on it. We serve them. Now, there are some restrictions that we impose, like on our programming. Those patrons, those access patrons have to go on a wait list. We serve our own patrons first because their tax dollars support that programming. Some of our electronic resources are also restricted, but for the most part, they can come in, check out books. There are some programs that are open to all. It's mostly our children's programs that are restricted. So we have been serving them for years, and there's been no fee. Some of our residents go to the Hellertown Library and use those facilities as well, and there's no charge to them either. So it's this back and forth sharing of resources that's been going on for some time. So when they gave us the $50,000 with no strings attached, and then claimed that it was for services, they were saying they appreciate all of the reciprocal services that we've been offering their residents. And that was the explanation that we got.
Okay. But it would seem to be logical to think that there could be more that they're implying, and also based upon the, various, news agencies and what they're reporting, at least some people believe that there might be more. What's your intent? And I mean, amongst the group, do you want to do this? And if so, why not just do it? If you don't, then why not put it to rest and just give the money back?
Part of the reason we have not used the $50,000 at this point is we have had Lower Saucon Township residents come to our board meetings and get up and tell us that they're very unhappy with their counselors, and there's probably litigation in the works to take their counselors to court. And we're concerned that somebody's going to show up someday soon and ask us to return the $50,000. So we didn't want to put ourselves in a bind of, we spent that on a lighting project or something like that, and now we got to come up with the $50,000. And we've heard that in more than one instance. As far as what you're reading in the newspaper, most of those people call me. I tell them one thing, and then what comes out in Saucon Source, the Morning Call, and every place else is a little bit left-handed work. Tony at Morning Call has been doing the best job so far, but he still doesn't get everything right. But that's the issue with the $50,000. Is there more? I don't know. We have not had a face-to-face conversation with Lower Saucon since probably July. We've asked them to come to our meetings. We've asked them to meet. What they want to do is meet in secret with 2 members of our board and 2 members of their board. And there's a thing called the Sunshine Law, which you all are familiar with. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to avoid meeting that. So we just finally put our foot down at the last board meeting, or 2 board meetings ago, and said, we're not doing it. If you want to talk about this, come to our board meeting or invite us to one of yours, which they haven't done either. And we've written and asked for it. So we're as confused as you are. Sure.
If I could just add a couple things to that also. Regarding the $50,000 check, there was direct, I don't know what word to use, implications or from Upper Saucon and Lower Milford that they very much wanted the library to accept the $50,000 check because it would give them the opportunity to possibly give a little less to the library next year. So there was real pressure from those two municipalities to accept the $50,000 check, whether this board really wanted to or not. So there was a lot of discussion on the board about, do they want to or do they not? So that's another part of that. And having the question of do they or do they not want to bring on Lower Saucon, the whole problem dating back to last February when this started is that it is not that easy. We've been trying to convince Lower Saucon in particular that it's not that easy. We can't just go and poach other libraries' service areas. We can't go to before the divorce is final over there. It would not be appropriate. It was not appropriate at any time to say, we'll take you on if you want to get rid of them. It was so the official ruling from the Office of Commonwealth Libraries only came a month ago, less than a month ago. So up until that point, I think Bruce has been very proper in not even letting the board as a whole talk about this issue because there was no issue to talk about when they still had a legally binding relationship intact. So,
Can I ask just a couple of questions just related to this topic, I guess, before anyone. So just so I understand, because this is fascinating information because I didn't know it's like a soap opera. But so the OCL
Soap opera is a good description.
But the OCL essentially is the overarching organization that would help in this situation moving forward. It sounds like to help grow because it doesn't sound like the townships are really doing a fantastic job of coming to a resolution. So is that what you're expecting to happen, or who's the final arbitrator in this situation between townships and Hellertown?
I'm going to have Mark address this
Well,
because he works with them. all the time.
if Lower Saucon, if it were come to pass that we were in discussion and wanted to proceed with Lower Saucon, it would need Office of Commonwealth approval,
Okay.
Office of Commonwealth Libraries approval, and that's normal. The added bonus that we only found out about a few months ago is that the Governor's Advisory Council, which is just a separate a little organization there that only meets 4 times a year, because this is crossing county boundaries and crossing library district boundaries, they have to be involved too. They would have to give their imprimatur to make this happen.
Okay.
So again, it's not as easy as just
Right.
want them.
So in this situation, then, since it's either I guess it kind of boils down to either you as a library board decide, okay, we're going to accept you to Lower Saucon, or Lower Saucon pushes to be accepted by you. Is that a fair understanding on my part? Like, it's like one of those two things
has
could
been.
happen to help push this forward, or you hear from the OCL.
Yes.
And then my other question is, my impression based on what you said is that there was pressure to accept the $50,000 check, which just complicates everything. But if the thought process behind that motivation to get you to accept that check was in order to diminish contributions from existing parties, how does that make any sense? Because they're going to increase the costs significantly unless there is a requirement. That's my bottom line question. If Lower Saucon somehow is accepted by the means that we've discussed, that you just mentioned, would they then be required to contribute? I'm assuming a certain percentage, because obviously your deficit is going to go up, and it wouldn't be fair to continue to up the ante for other contributors such as ourselves.
The requirement would be in the form of an agreement between the library and Lower Saucon. There is no official requirement from the Office of Commonwealth Libraries. The requirement from the Office of Commonwealth Libraries is that the library itself basically raise a minimum of $5 per capita.
Okay.
in local funds, municipal fundraising, whatever.
Uh-huh.
So the onus falls on the library, not on the municipalities.
Thank you.
Which in theory would ultimately, sorry, Emily Gaiman, which in theory would ultimately be at the library's discretion, and you might have to resort to appealing to the current municipalities and school district and Lower Milford and Coopersburg to fill that deficit. Is that, I'm
If-
seeing
if we
shaking
took-
heads, yeah.
If we took Lower Saucon on,
Yeah, that would,
Sure.
okay, thanks,
sure.
thanks.
I mean, we can't do it for free.
No, right, I was just wondering if, thanks for explaining that, because folks might assume if taking them on increases your requirements financially, then maybe, but the responsibility does not fall on them, it falls on everyone within your library
Well,
usage.
It falls on us as a library in that we have to hire more staff. Have to. We have to add to our collection, which is tens of thousands of dollars. I don't know where we put more staff in our current building, so we're probably going to have to add a room or two onto our building. That's a few thousand dollars. You guys have gone through all kinds of building projects and stuff. We've tried to flesh out those numbers. I mean, it's a staggering number. And so that's,
And you,
I want to come back to the OCL thing for a second.
Yeah.
Mark was right. OCL is kind of the guiding light of the libraries here in the Commonwealth. But the thing, we learned this in a meeting with OCL maybe 2 months ago, that this governor's advisory council were like, wait a minute, what's this? Oh no, it has to go through them too. Well, who are they? Well, they couldn't tell us who they were, where they met, and when they meet. So it's like every time we turn around, somebody's throwing a new wrinkle in this thing. So even if we wanted to take Lower Saucon Township on, we can't at this point. And with the current letter that went from their solicitor to OCL asking to have Hellertown to back off, they don't want to be unserved. We're sitting here waiting for information.
Okay, thanks for visiting tonight. I do have a couple of questions
Sure.
here. Number one, if Lower Saucon Township joins the public library, that by default would make Southern Lehigh School District a non-voting member anyway. Is that correct? Based upon contributions. I
Go
think
ahead.
the answer is yes, but
It could be, if Lower Saucon, and if the school district's funding fell below 15% of the total municipal funding received by the library.
right. So when you
So
start
if they need
considering,
$100,000, $150,000, yeah, that may push the school district below 15%.
because it's, the case that Lower Saucon Township has about 10,000 residents, Upper Saucon has 17,000. So one would think out of about, they're about 60% by population that, that would skew the contribution to a point where it's below the threshold, and then we would no longer be a voting member. So I just wanted to kind of ask that. Thank you. And then regarding resources and, yeah.
Unless we get these new bylaws changed that says you get a voting school member, whether you're 15%, 17%, or 12%. Upper Saucon controls that. Right now they are, yeah.
But you're not going anywhere.
So far we have.
Okay, and then talking about resources, and you said that, there are resource challenges, and you have about 30 volunteers at this point. Do you consider additional backfilling of resources utilizing volunteers, additional volunteers, instead of paid volunteers?
Are you referring to using volunteers versus employees?
Yeah, or at least as a stopgap or a part of them, depending on what those roles are. I don't know what those roles are. So that's why I was asking the question about the person being a paid employee, so to speak, versus a volunteer employee to, increase your resource pool. That's the question.
Well, if we were to take Lower Saucon, the state requires a certain level of full-time equivalent employees. We could not.
Could you use the microphone, please?
Sorry. Sorry. If we were to take on Lower Saucon Township, the state requires a certain level of full-time equivalent employees. For us, that would mean we would have to hire approximately 4 more full-time people. We can't use volunteers in that position. They have to be paid employees.
Okay, thank you for that response. The next question then is, those numbers, the calculation for the numbers of 4, how is that exactly based? How do you derive that number then?
It is full-time equivalent, 1 full-time equivalent for every 3,500 people in your service area.
Okay, so it's
State
merely
requirement.
population, not participation of the asset, right? Okay. Yeah. So when you were going through the your strategies, did you ask the Hellertown Area Library or Lower Saucon Township, of which I remember, for their current usage numbers of the people that are using it on a regular basis from Lower Saucon that use the Hellertown Library? And then also, secondly, do you have the numbers of the people that are utilizing the Southern Lehigh Public Library that are already from Lower Saucon Township that are already using it through the state system access pass?
The first question, part of your question, no, we have not done our own numbers on that. I trust other people who have put out the number that roughly 2/3 of Hellertown's registered patrons are from Lower Saucon. Concrete number, I do not have, but I know that percentage.
With respect to your second question, back when this started, we had approximately 110 Lower Saucon residents that were using our library through the Access PA program. But we have seen a dramatic increase as this story continues to unfold. We are getting more of them coming in and becoming Access PA patrons because they're concerned about losing privileges.
How dramatic is dramatic?
I don't have an exact number for you, but I can get that number for you.
I'm just trying to understand the numbers themselves and, the true impact and how that really is impacting the library itself versus, not having numbers behind it. That's why I'm asking the numbers. Thank you.
Bruce, could you just do me a favor and could you give me a little bit of the history of the funding from the school district to your library, to the county? Can you give me a little bit of that history?
I don't know if I can give you that history. I've been on the board 2 years, so
Yeah.
my history is going to be short.
And I think they gave us a handout that had
Yeah,
that
it's
tonight, the Southern Lehigh Public Library Municipal and District contributions by fiscal year. So that's at least 6 years it looks like that they gave us tonight for a history of funding.
It's about $650,000 over the last 10 years.
I've been with the library for 33 years and and director for 23. In my history, there was never a year when the school district was not supporting the library in some way financially.
How much is Lower Saucon willing to give per year to join the library?
If I had the answer to that question, I tell you, I don't know. We haven't talked to them since July. And when we have talked to them, it's been very vague, very threatening, very private meetings. And their comment has always been, well, we've got plenty of money. Okay. Well, why don't you tell us how much you got? So I couldn't give you the answer to that. I know that they have $160,000 budgeted for next year for library services, because I went on their meeting and when they were doing their budget meeting, but we don't know if that was for us. They were going to go back to they were going to make nice and go back to Hellertown, what they were going to do. So they've even talked to us about, they have a building in Lower Saucon they could turn into a branch library. And my comment at one meeting was, well, then why don't you just clear it out, put up some shelves and open up a library and leave us alone?
I have a few questions.
Sure.
So if you don't meet the FTE requirements that OCL requires, what happens? You're saying that
Well,
OCL
they
mandates a
would
certain
go-
level
they
of
would go in-
FTEs based on population.
it would affect our funding, or state.
And how
funding.
much is that state funding per year?
It accounts for, I have the 2021 number, but it accounts for 10%, 11% of their total revenue. And actually, it's going up.
So 58,000 would be lost if you didn't meet the FTE requirement.
It could.
It could. So, okay, I'm getting that math in terms of additions versus loss of revenue. The other question I had was regarding the very beginning of your presentation. You were talking about a referendum and a 2/10 millage increase. And you stated that that would relieve the school district of its financial obligations, but you later in the discussion or presentation indicated you wanted flat level funding from the school district. Can you clarify that?
Well, if we keep going the way we are right now, I mean, if we're coming for 2023, because if we do this referendum, we can't even do it until next May. So our request this year, and I don't think we've had our meeting with you all yet for funding, is for level funding. for
Okay, so
next-
the request is for this year, not ongoing.
Hopefully not. Hopefully we can get this referendum passed and do that.
Okay.
If we do give you the level funding again, would you be amiable to adding 2 representatives to the library board so that Southern Lehigh had a proper financial representation on the board?
At this point, I couldn't give you an honest answer on that. And quite frankly, that all lays in our bylaws, and it's sitting over here on, off of Preston Lane at the Southern Lehigh office. I don't know.
Okay, I think Mr. Deming had some questions and comments.
It's just a couple comments. First off, I missed the very beginning. I apologize. I did want to thank you, Bruce.
We'll send you a tardy.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Would be my first one. I wanted to thank you, Bruce, and the other volunteers for your hard work on the board. Certainly appreciate that. Don't want to give you the impression that we're an inquisition going on here. I think we're just trying to get a better understanding of what's going on over there. But we're certainly happy that you're here tonight, and we're thankful for your hard work. Just 1 or 2 comments. I don't really understand what's happening either with Lower Saucon. Certainly, from an outside view of what I've heard tonight, and this may be your view as well, and maybe I suspect you guys don't want to necessarily say exactly what your view is, but my view of what I've heard, I would probably be running away from Lower Saucon if I were in your shoes. It sounds as if they're not forthcoming. They don't play well with others. The last library they were involved with, evidently they're now at war with. And again, I don't, sounds like they might be Democrats. I'm joking. I have no idea what they are. No idea. That was a joke.
You're like, what happened?
I don't know.
These
I don't know. But my point is, yeah, I mean, it does sound as if, and it's, I guess, a sad thing in a way that maybe Upper Saucon provided pressure on you to take the $50,000. But for what it's worth, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like generally a bad idea to be involved with. And it sounds like for some reason you guys got in their crosshairs and it's become your problem. I would say, to the extent that it's costing you legal costs, I do think it seems more than reasonable that if it cost you $10,000 last year to deal with them, I would immediately take that out of the $50,000. And if it's going to cost you another 10 this year, I'd take that out of the $50,000. I'm not a very good attorney, and I certainly don't know much about that kind of stuff. But if somebody writes you a check for 50 and tells you there's no strings attached to it, and you start spending it, I think it's going to be relatively difficult for them to get it back. And since you've, in my mind, spent 10,000 of it, or incurred costs because of them of at least 10,000, be my thought that I would begin to take that money out of the 50. So I hope you guys, I guess it would be my encouragement to you from a member of one of the folks that help oversee and sit on your board, so to speak, that, I would ask you to be strong and do what's best for the library. Some of your, I understand the pressure from Upper Saucon, and they may have some really good reasons too. I obviously don't know everything about it, but the reality is I think you're being buffeted by these outside forces to some degree and feel a lot of pressure. And of course, you don't have your own independent funding streams for the most part, and that's why you feel this way. But I think you should, it sounds like you guys have a pretty good idea of what the right thing to do is. It seems to me the right thing would be to sort of stay away from Lower Saucon as best you can. And then the last thing I did want to just a few questions just to clarify this. The tax referendum got my attention in a hurry. And so just so I understand, since that looks like that might be coming, it sounds like you need a municipality or a government agency to sponsor a referendum. So maybe you'll be knocking on our door in the near future. A tax referendum would give you an independent funding stream. And then I assume you're saying you would not at that point seek any funding from any of the local municipalities and replace it with what would then be your own ability for revenue from tax. Am I hearing that correct?
Yes.
And if you have a tax referendum, does that give you taxing authority going forward, or is it a set amount going forward? And so it's a set amount, and you indicated it would be 2 mils.
Yeah. 2/10 of
I'm sorry, 2/10 of a mil. And what is that amount?
It's about what, $50 a household.
For a $250,000 assessed home, it would be $50 a year. We're looking at, I think, I'm sorry, I had it right here. It would amount to, sorry, $572,000.
Would that essentially, so, I mean, I guess you guys, I would think, would definitely know this, I hope, this answer, which is that number that you've picked, I assume more or less is the equivalent or close to of what you currently receive from Coopersburg, Upper Saucon, Lower Milford, and Southern Lehigh School District? Or it's more?
It is more, but it takes into account, it's just, the thought process is it takes into account covering the municipal funding, covering possible other local funding, such as the Helping Hands, which they've been very successful with. Well, people aren't necessarily going to give as much to the Helping Hands if they're already being taxed. So taking all that into account, which that alone adds up to about $350,000. You plan for the future because, like you said, it is not an ongoing taxing authority. You want to have enough money moving forward, not have to go back to the taxpayers. There's 2 examples. Copley Borough won their tax referendum, didn't ask for enough, and they got nothing. They got no growth in the borough. Parkland went back about 15 years after their first one, and they failed. So there's that possibility too, that you won't get that second referendum increase. So planning for all that is the rationale behind it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting stuff. I look forward to, obviously that's a different conversation probably for another night.
And let me add one more thing. We haven't done anything on it yet for 2 reasons. One is tomorrow midterms elections, and you have to get the signatures based on the voter turnout from tomorrow.
Okay.
So you can't do anything. And secondly, the gentleman at Lehigh County, Tim
Bayho. Yeah. Bayho.
has basically said, you got to leave me alone for a couple of weeks. Let me get through this midterm election, and then I'll be glad to talk to you.
So you're talking about, this would be when you say next, you're talking this spring. The spring of
next May.
2023.
Right.
That it would be at the next municipal election, which
Right.
would be like the primary in
Right.
the spring.
Right.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
it's not like we came up with this idea. I'm sorry.
How would that change board representation?
That's one of the things we've been paying the lawyer for. Unfortunately, the library code is very vague on certain things, and you need, and the Office of Commonwealth Library, strangely enough, will not give us legal guidance. They keep saying, go ask a lawyer, pay for a lawyer yourself. So there's little questions like that we can't give you a definite answer because the code is vague. To Office of Commonwealth Libraries? No, they're the ones that give us state aid.
I think your tax dollars pay for it.
Yeah.
So indirectly, yes.
And is any of that tied up in the bylaws changes you're waiting for?
No.
Okay, none
No,
of
we
that is
haven't-
affected.
we-
Okay.
Other than doing a lot of research on referendums, talking to other libraries and stuff, we've just said, let's wait till we get through these midterm elections and then we'll put that. I mean, we got enough stuff going on right now. We don't need to be
So you
adding
wouldn't,
something else.
so if the referendum was successful, you wouldn't have to worry about who votes on how to spend the money if the bylaws weren't approved by Upper Saucon? How would that work if you're still trying to figure out?
We would probably, well, Mark's point was a good one. We're waiting for the attorney to tell us, because the bylaws are we're probably gonna have to have new bylaws if we do the referendum.
Right.
Which,
I was kind of asking which came first, the chicken or the egg. That's my kind of a question. Right. I get a lot of.
yeah, I think both.
Okay, great.
And we very well could, our bylaws right now say that right now we have 7 board members. We can have up to 9. So we might go back and change the bylaws to say, okay, you get 2, you get 3, you get 4, however that works out. So we haven't gotten that far yet.
Thanks.
I just had another question, just to clarify the student. You had given us some information on registered patrons and use. Thank you very much for that information. I think that's really important from my standpoint, certainly. Could you comment on how many of those juveniles are current K through 12 students? Are they all pre-K? Are they very young children? Do you mind just give me, I know you may not have the exact numbers, but can you give me a sense as to how many of these are students within our school district?
I do not have that information tonight. And I don't know that our system, our computer system would even break it down by age. We can break it down by municipality. We know that it's students or children under the age of 18. But I do not know that we can break it down by age groupings.
How about those programs? You said you had 42 separate programs over the summer, which is wonderful. How many of those programs are geared towards K through 12 students, or how many of them are geared towards pre-K students?
I would have to get back to you on that, but I do have that information.
Thank you.
But I can get back to you on that.
Does the library have a mission statement?
Yes, we do, but we're probably going to update it when we do our strategic plan.
So I did want to make one quick comment. I think it's clear on the basis of what you indicated with usage and the information with respect to programs throughout the year and parents checking on behalf of their students, and the fact that third-party businesses I know use the library as well, and it's a great place for people to come together. I think all of those things really reinforce the importance of the library within the community itself and how much overlap there is and how difficult it is truly to distinguish between, K through 12, pre-K, those that are retired, for example, those that are, living within the community and utilizing it potentially for classes while their children are in school to help maintain their health and well-being. And I think that also helps underscore our own district commitment, meaning the Southern Lehigh School District. We serve the entire community, not just our students. So I think it mirrors very well. So thank you for presenting that information.
One thing we didn't mention tonight, but I feel like we should. We're talking about who we serve and when we served them. Let me go back a year or two during the COVID mess, where the school was closed, the library was closed, everything was closed. We kept our library open enough so that we could do offsite programs, we could do Zoom programs, we could do curbside checkouts and stuff. And we were two things. We were able to keep our employees employed and paid, but we were also able to serve all of the community with something that a lot of communities didn't have. So I just wanted you to know.
Yeah. And I just wanted to echo Dr. Shireen's comments of thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for at such short notice answering all those questions and really helping us understand. It's much appreciated. And as far as usage, I do know just from personal experience, correct me if I'm wrong, but the programs you do offer in the summer, you were talking about earlier, it's kind of a first come to the people in the community. And if there are any spots left, other folks in outside, such as Hellertown, could participate. Right. But it's my understanding that all those programs pretty much fill, and that there is, right, I'm seeing shaking heads of yes. So thank you for offering both preschool, pre-K programming to our students throughout the summer. And one of the biggest things I know as educators face is learning loss and kind of, hitting the ground running. So thank you, because I know those programs are completely maxed out and there are waiting lists even for our own residents. So I can't imagine what you would do if you added another municipality with regards to our kids, especially. I mean, you might be able to accommodate adults and coming in the building and all, and you'd get that circulation up, but the programs for those kids and where you're going to hold the programs and how you're going to staff them, our kids max out your programs every year, and you can't offer them even to our own communities, our own school districts, children. So thank you for continuing to expand that program and be so, and I understand you don't have the data, but just from personal experience, I know. And I just wanted to say thank you for coming out tonight and thank you for serving our kids that way and our seniors. It's great. It ends both ends of that spectrum that we don't normally touch as a school board, and we can this way. So thanks.
And quite frankly, we had one of our board members who got shut out on the program and couldn't get her.
Couldn't get her grants
And she has not let us forget
because he's
it.
not a resident. Oh man.
No, he's a resident. That's one
I
of
just
our
have a
board
closing
Oh, even
comment.
as a
I just have
resident.
one more
Gotcha.
question.
Okay.
Closing
Thank you.
comment. Yeah.
Thank you.
members.
Yeah.
She's like, I can't get my kid in there.
There you go.
So we don't pull any strings for.
I have just one more
Sure.
additional comment. I know that libraries across the state of Pennsylvania within the counties and municipalities are structured differently and funded differently. And it seems like a real mix of bureaucratic structures that are very difficult for community members to understand. What are the best practices, and have you looked strategically at what some of the best practices are that are working across or in other parts of the state, to see if you might want to look to collaborate with others in the Lehigh County, Northampton County, or Lehigh Valley to improve how this works bureaucratically?
Strangely enough, there was an email this morning from the Governor's Advisory Council from their minutes from their last meeting, and one of the items was a report that was done by a former librarian about what changes should be made with Pennsylvania libraries, and that was a big topic about trying to find what works. I think that what I came away from just reading it briefly this morning was a county type of system is the best. But using what we have, I think consortiums in general, groupings work better. And we, in the Allentown District, the Lehigh and Carbon County Libraries, formed bottom up. In 2018, we started our own cooperative. So the 12 libraries are acting as if we are a system, but we're not a system.
And I hope that figures into your strategic planning next year.
It does.
Okay, any other, go
Yeah,
ahead,
one
Mr.
last
Maud.
thing. I just want to thank you again for coming in, and I would say that the more we know as a school district board, the better we will work together. So I'd appreciate, as well as I think the rest of the board here, that we would get as much information as practical and, take the numbers and get the detail in there. I think it will help you, not even just for us, but it will help you to do your planning and really understand where the resources need to go and where the funds need to go. And then in turn, getting information from the typical reports that you email. I do read them. And then also some feedback from our board representative, Ms. Parsons, if you could continue or start communicating some of these factors moving forward so that we know what's happening until which time things do change. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to echo what Steve had said. I've asked a few times about really what are the K through 12, data.
Right.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys looking into that. I know it can be challenging, as Dr. Serene said, so I certainly understand that it can be challenging. But I think that's going to be important for our board, especially when it comes to talking about future funding as well. And then I just had one other question. You had mentioned COVID and how you guys stayed open. I think as of relatively recently, maybe a few months ago, I saw a sign outside of the library that mentioned mask hours. Can you look at just mention? Could you mind explaining what that exactly was? I'm just trying to get a sense again of usage and everything.
Well, when the pandemic was newer, I guess, we reopened, we did require masks. We have now gone to no mask required. It's optional for everyone. But in the middle there, we went kind of back and forth depending on the county data. We were watching that very closely to see what the numbers were in our area and following the guidelines of the CDC and the Pennsylvania Department of Health. So we've kind of gone back and forth, but currently there's no mask required, and we have a sign up on the door that says masks are optional.
Was there a time, I thought I saw a time frame. Was there a time frame, like a 2-hour window or an hour window?
Oh,
where
well,
there
that was one of the iterations
okay.
that we had. We had some folks in our community who had some medical conditions that really they were in danger if they got COVID, and so they asked us if there was any times that they could bring their families in and feel safer to be able to use the library. So we had gone with mask optional, but we had a couple hours during the week where masks were required. And we announced that so that those families could come in and feel safe. And we actually, the one comment we received back from that, we had a gentleman who was a double lung transplant recipient who came in personally to thank us for doing that, because he said, I cannot use the library unless everyone is masked. The risk is way too great for me. So that was just one example of someone who actually came up to me and said something about their personal situation during that time. But we now have taken that away, and it's optional for everyone. So
I just had a quick question. I'm just for Dr. Wayak. Just help me understand, I guess, how you feel that the K through 12 data is important as a distinction, I guess. Just so I
Yeah,
understand.
sure,
Yeah.
certainly. So I would like, I think, since we, are responsible for the funding of the school district primarily, and we're giving a
Kids age 0 to 4 or 5 until they get to us, or $1 spent in kindergarten for literacy specifically and bolstering that experience and making them school ready pays off in the long run. By the time that same amount of money to make that same impact on that child, by the time you get them to 3rd grade, you're looking at a school district that's spending, I don't know, like $15 or so, or $20 for $1 you spend in kindergarten or pre-K. So while I appreciate your comment, Dr. Wayak, I also appreciate Dr. Shireen's, because it might be difficult to follow the trail of breadcrumbs, but that dollar spent when a kid is 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 does impact our population and does impact our budgeting actually as a district, because it turns kids who might have needed a 504 or an IEP into someone who just needs, an aid to pull out once a week. So I do think it directly impacts not only our community, our entire taxpaying community, but also our kids and our bottom line. If you're going to break it, if you need to break it down to dollars, and sometimes we do, not only is it in the best interest of kids, but it's in the best interest of this district's budget to spend those pre-K early literacy dollars, which is what Dr. Mahan is also focusing on currently as a goal of the district.
And
I think it ties in nicely.
And don't forget, our kids have parents that sometimes, for example, are out of work and cannot access, Wi-Fi, for example, in their own homes, and they need access to the internet in order to look for jobs. That, it's a resource for the families of those children that are in K through 12. It's just something to keep in mind.
Well, that's what kind of makes me sad about what are we going to do with 11,000 people that can't access the library after they leave Hellertown. We're not even giving them any consideration, I don't feel. And I think we need to move further on this and get more information so that perhaps these 11,000 people can have the same benefits that we do and they're willing to pay for it.
Okay, anything new in terms of comments or questions?
I had a comment. The number of residents that we have in our community that do not have children in our schools still pay a hefty amount in school taxes, as we all know. And we spend very little money as a school district. And as Mr. Wayak said, rightfully so, we are tasked with the students, but they see very little return on their investment when they pay their taxes because they don't have kids going to school. And I think that the library is a great way for those people to see a return on what they're having to put in without having kids in the district.
I want to thank you all for coming out tonight and being frank and answering all of our questions to the best of your ability. Okay.
I'd like to, on behalf of the board members here, I'd like to thank all of you for asking those questions and listening to us. It's been a wonderful opportunity for us to have a conversation back and forth. I do have one question I'd like to pose to all of you. When Mrs. Parsons and I attended the last couple of school board meetings, one of the topics that came up was the budgeted amount that was indicated in your current budget for the library. And you said at your last board meeting that you were holding that up until any payments up until you receive some information. When might we expect a decision on that?
I'm sorry. I think I was not here that meeting. Are you saying that the amount that is currently in this year's school district budget allocated to the library is being held up until this conversation took place? Is that what I'm understanding the question to be?
That was my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Missed that one. Don't miss many, but I missed that one. Do we have an answer?
Well, I missed that too, so I suspect that is not accurate, but.
What do you?
Well,
No,
let me
that's actually
offer
accurate.
it. When we were talking about this during budget time, this was a topic of conversation. And in the, I can't remember precisely, but what we.
No, this was just 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, this conversation that you're referring to when you were in the audience, right?
Let
Yeah.
Dr. Mayon
And it
finish.
was also, I also referred to a conversation, a private conversation I had with Mr. Pepe. He came to visit at the library and we had a brief conversation about the tax referendum and then about the amount budgeted for the library in your current budget.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to talk about the process, okay?
Sure.
Go ahead, Dr. Mayon.
And what I can say is that this topic has been discussed for a while. And some time ago, I think in budget preparations, this was an issue. And we said, as an administration, that we would put the money in the budget. But because of the uncertainty and the discussions that were happening among board members, we would not expend the funds without a formal approval from the board. And so that's the approach we're taking. The money is budgeted, which is very different than being expended. And we said that at any point, should the board decide to vote to release those funds, obviously we would, but administration would not unilaterally make that contribution in light of the discussions that were occurring at the time among board members.
So how do we do that then? Can we vote on that? Like, when do we vote on that?
I think if there is a sense among board members that there's a desire to vote on it, we could put it on as a motion at some future meeting.
Can we do that?
I have that desire. I have that desire. I'm voicing my opinion.
Yeah, I do also.
So we'll add that to the agenda at a future meeting. Yes, we can make it the next meeting. No, since there's two board members who have requested this, we can put the motion on the agenda for the next meeting.
So with that, we certainly will. So we'll just make a note and we'll have that on our agenda for next, for the 21st.
So
as
that
well.
way the public has information in advance. Okay.
And anything that you send, if you could actually send me any information or to the board, we'll have that in advance and that can inform the conversation around the topic.
Yeah, and basically it comes down to the quarterly payments, because what happens is the amount that was set aside in the budget is still there. And then the quarterly payments are made September, December, March, and June. So September's payment is the one that's being held until the board comes to a decision.
No,
Okay,
I don't-
so we
I don't
could,
think I don't think it's going to be a problem. I suspect this board's going to fund it. It's in the budget. So we'll get you that certainty. I think you deserve that. Thank you for raising that issue.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
If I could just say, as your board representative, I appreciate you letting me represent the board. And anytime you want me to come and give you an update, I'd be happy to do that. It was different when I was on the board and working at the library, and I could just casually talk about it. But anytime you want me to come in, just let me know.
Okay, let's move on to Dr. Trinkle.
And actually, Mrs. Reinhardt, if I may request a change in the agenda to swap number 4 and number 5, because we have guests here from,
That's fine.
and, right.
Yeah,
And while
okay.
they may be compelled to want to stay for Dr. Trinkle's presentation, it's going to be a great one. Perhaps we would move you up on the agenda. So Mr. Pepe, if we could do number 5. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I did a presentation at the last meeting about our capital projects and need for funding. So I'm not going to really spend much time talking about it. Instead, I'm just going to introduce, we have from Concord Financial, Chris Gibbons with us, and we have as bond counsel from Kingsbury, both Richard Campbell and Kevin Reed. And I believe that Mr. Gibbons is going to be up first.
Thank you, Mr. Pepe, for the introduction. Nice to see you all again this evening. I put in front of your places a 4-page handout that kind of outlines what the discussion will be for this evening. The consideration of a borrowing of $8,039,000. Excuse me. You might recall that we discussed this with the Building and Grounds Committee on August 31st, where we actually solicited financing proposals from 35 different banks. 8 banks responded with 15 proposals. The best proposals we received was from Embassy Bank of the Lehigh Valley. Gave us a fixed rate of 2.82% for the first 7 years, and then it was variable thereafter, 75% of prime with an interest rate cap of 4.25%. I know that at the time there was discussion on the direction the district was interested in taking with this financing. And I was directed at the time to see if we could make a extension of the offer of financing from Embassy Bank for a longer period of time, which they agreed to do. They agreed to extend that offer through November the 11th. So the proposal that was received in August is still available today. But think about that. What has really changed in all our financial markets these days? Since that time, interest rates have gone up. So what has been was an attractive proposal at the time is quite frankly a proposal that you could not receive if you went out for bank loan financing proposals now. We also talked at the time of the possibility of looking at bond financing instead of bank loan financing. Excuse me, bank loan financing, and it didn't make any cost-effective sense to consider any further on the bond issue financing. Also, it's also important to note that the proposal at Embassy Bank is put forth for the school district is prepayable at any time, and it also allows you to draw the money down over 3 years. Essentially like a line of credit, so you only pay the interest on the monies that you actually draw down. The next page is just essentially sources of use of monies, where it would go. The $8,039,000 would be for construction projects. Issuance cost outlined further down on the page. And then the principal repayment schedule is on page 2, rows 1 through 6. Where you can see the annual payments in 22-23, fiscal year 22-23, not this fiscal year, the next fiscal year, would be approximately $275,000. I say approximately because that's if the money is all drawn down at closing. That will not be the case, so that number will actually be lower. The annual payments thereafter are approximately $715,000 for the remaining term of the 15 years. As I also mentioned, it is variable rate after the 7th year with an interest rate cap of 4.25%. So the repayment structure that you see there in column 6 is the maximum annual debt service payments that you would have to pay should all the funds be drawn down. The next page is a summary that I know we usually discuss this. I thought I'd just bring it up rather than kind of wait for the question. Is there any opportunity to refinance, renegotiate anything else with existing debt? Quite frankly, with the quick increase in interest rates, there is no other alternative at this point, but I thought I'd put that all on one page so that you could see what your total debt service and payments are at this point. That's my presentation. It's pretty straightforward. It still is an active proposal is in front of you for your consideration should you like to move ahead, and ask for any questions.
So a quick question. In the past, when bonds and loans have been structured, we had a wraparound because of the need for for budgetary stability over time. This does not have the wraparound as we have requested.
Correct.
And I just, maybe you could highlight that and also noting that we do not intend to pay these issues through operating expenses, but rather through the capital reserve. Could you talk about perhaps the benefits or costs or what the trade-offs are in taking this approach?
Certainly. What Dr. Mann's referring to is column 6 again. The last time we were discussing this loan, column 6 had a very different look to it. The payments were only interest for the first 6 or 7 years, and then it followed up with larger principal and interest payments when the existing debt service paid off. So overall, you had a lower overall debt service impact every year from a budgetary standpoint. But obviously, when you postpone repayment of principal, it costs you more in interest. So column 6, principal and interest payments, because as you can see, it looks just like a home mortgage now where you pay approximately the same amount of principal and interest every year. Your interest expense with this iteration of the financing proposal would save about $1 million in interest cost all total.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
I think we pretty much went over most of this with Mr. Pepe at the last meeting.
We did.
Yeah, my only question would be if we had any update about I know it's going to cost more than the 8 million, as Dr. Mahan mentioned. Do we have any update about the brick project or final numbers on that? How much more over, how much we're going to have to dip into capital reserve beyond what we would have to repay this?
We're in the process now of validating those particular numbers that came in with an estimate close to $1 million, which was significantly lower than we were anticipating. But it just gives more credibility to the 8 million issuance that we're looking for. So I think we're in good shape.
Okay, great. Is that, so, but we're still going to have to go beyond 8 million, just not by as much, or do I understand correctly? Or should we be able to pretty much cover those 3 project HVAC at the high school, the brick project at the IS, and the stadium project with the 8 million?
Yeah, one of the biggest offsets that we have that makes that palatable is the ESSER funding of 1.5 million for the HVAC.
Gotcha.
At the high school.
Okay.
And then we also would at that point look at what do we have already in our capital reserve and what we're looking to hopefully generate for additions to capital reserve as we move forward with the balanced budget.
Okay. So beyond paying for this out of general fund won't take too much more of a hit. And thank you for also explaining that the funds that we are saving, the interest rates we're going to acquire on the funds that we are not going to use because we're taking this out is going to compensate for. Oh, and we're going to, gain money on the deal instead of.
And ultimately, as I said before, it's even more so today.
Yeah.
Is the ultimate flexibility that we have, not just in this initial year, but in years to come. At this point, it's like sitting on a mortgage that's so good that you're like, why would I pay it off?
Right.
And
Cheapest
yet,
money you'll ever get.
Once we get to year 8, we can certainly see where we are. And at that point, as a board, if we decided to pay it off, we could certainly do that and or continue it and or incorporate it into the annual budget. But these are all options that we have with this vehicle. If we took a bond, it's simply you bond, you take the proceeds from the bond, and every year you're into that fixed schedule.
Yeah. Thanks so much for exploring those options. And really, thanks for working with Mr. Gibbons and Mr. Pepe. Thanks for crunching those numbers to get us in that position. Really appreciate it.
Certainly.
Just one confirmation, Mr. Pepe, the HVAC portion of this, just to be clear to everybody, is only a portion of the high school building. It's not the rest of the facilities on campus. And I just want to acknowledge everybody too for their hard work in getting this deal together. I know there was a lot of back and forth for King Spry and Mr. Gibbons and, our administrative staff moving around in these uncertain interest times. So thanks.
Okay. Can I have a motion to improve the 2022 financing project as
Aye.
detailed on the agenda in 5A B1?
Second. I'll move it.
Mr. Maud? Okay. Any other comments or questions before we vote? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? It's approved. Thank you for coming out tonight. Appreciate it and all your hard work.
Kev, do you have any thought, or do you want anything for our friends from Kings Pride?
In the
Mr.
rare
Reed?
occasion, Kevin Reed of Kings Pride, I'm an attorney and I will be brief.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right.
Sometimes less is more.
All right, okay, very good.
All right. I'll just say thank you to your staff and also to the board for their deliberative process, because we've been able to work with both the board, your business office, and Chris to pull this together. And it does take a team to do that. So just want to let you know that. The only other thing I will tell you is this, that now we have the ability to file this with the Commonwealth, which is required for all school districts and municipalities. We will do that, and then we have a scheduled closing, correct me if I'm wrong, December 13th. So,
Okay.
thank you very much.
This is about as good a deal as you can ever get.
You know,
gotta
sometimes timing
works.
very well
Timing
for
works.
you guys.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, moving on. Dr. Trinkle.
You need a block? You know, I talked to Mike and he's gonna make me a little stuff to see if that can help me in the future. So I'm up here more often. So thank you. Just a very brief update and overview of some academic initiatives and just a preview. It really is just kind of, Mike and I were laughing a little bit this morning. It is just like the trailer of what you'll see in December. But the last school year was filled with a ton of accomplishments, academics, athletics, the arts. We should be very proud of what we saw our students and our teachers accomplish last year. And I wanted to take a moment and highlight that. To make sure Luke could get back in. Within our K-3 schools, we continue to make marked progress on our early literacy programming with our implementation of foundations. We continued our emphasis throughout this school year with support and action while we continue to evaluate a large area of curricular need within our school system. Curriculum and standards are ever changing, and the way our students are learning, or the way our students learn has also been progressively changing, and that's critical in education right now. We all see it, we all feel it. Understanding, we're taking a step back and kind of understanding our demographics and our needs within our community. And that's our overarching goal, is to expand participation in rigorous and academically challenging coursework for our students. Even more through that process, we are identifying more needs, and that's okay. And we're going to support those needs, or we're going to address those needs. And arguably, I think that's our most important task, whether we're learning how to drive a car, learning how to swim, or we're learning how to read. Learning has to take place. And of course, you know, testing is a useful measure for that, and it is a useful measurement for success, but it's not the only assessment tool, and it's not the only measurement for success. It is a critical time. We all see it. We see it as a perfect time to reinforce our focus on positive student outcomes. And that'll include school improvement efforts with goal setting, data, metrics, and reflection and feedback on all of our processes. Chris, you're keeping up? Nope, back one. Sorry, we tried to stream back one, but there's some update my computer requires that I have deliberately been ignoring. Last year, we continued to evaluate our strategic resources in literacy, early literacy, because we know that early literacy and academic success is really tied to reading by grade 3. So we targeted that purposefully. And this work is so exciting. And in and out of our K-3 schools throughout the beginning till now of our school year, I encourage you to set up a time to come in and see it in action. It is really awesome to see. And that is a testament to our educators and our principal leaders in our schools supporting our staff, watching that happen every day. I encourage you to do that. I mentioned foundations before. That was our core, a supplement to our core resource last year for early literacy, and that focuses on phonics. We actually added geodes, which are decodables, which helps our fluency as well. So we're doing both simultaneously through our core. We're focusing on phonics and fluency, which were two areas that we identified as needs last year. And just as a reminder, Foundations is a tier 1. All students are getting it, and it does impact all students at varying levels of student learning needs. Professional development started last year in April, and it is embedded throughout this year up until probably the spring. We had almost once a month, we're having professional development from the representatives from foundations. Last year, we also took some really critical steps when we looked at our MTSS model for K-3 reading. We established more clearly defined entry and exit criterias in tiers 2 and tier 3. And we had a very large discussion about that last year, I think in February of last year. We were determined also to streamline those resources within those tiers so that we could refine our goal setting and our progress monitoring processes. That was critical in building our process for a comprehensive K-3 literacy program. It's essential because now we're moving forward into that in 4 through 6. So we're not stopping at grade 3. We're moving that process into 4 through 6 to make sure we're capturing what we need to there as well. I want to move to secondary and highlight some of our work for dual enrollment. Within our partnership of L-Tri-C, we continue to break those barriers and increase student access, which is a goal of one of ours as a district. We added 10 additional dual enrollment courses just through L-Tri-C to start this school year, totaling 13 dual enrollment courses, and that happened from the end of the school year till August. So we did a lot of work in a very short period of time with a new principal. We also partnered with Mansfield for their early start program, 13 college level courses that are college level, not dual enrollment, college courses that our students have access to. And we pledge to continue our communication and outreach so our families have better understanding and better opportunity to access those amazing opportunities. Last year at the high school, we also offered after-school programming in both mathematics and writing, and those after-school programs were heavily used. We focused on those outcomes last year and how much those programs were used. In our summer programming, in our incoming first and second graders was a huge success in our summer ramp up. They were exposed to academic review, thematic content in a supportive learning environment that they didn't have the year before in preparation for the start of this school year. I take the occasion very quickly to highlight some of the great work, some of the steps we've already taken. We have a lot of work to do. We recognize our students have needs, and we emphasize and celebrate our work, but we pause and we reflect. And we've been doing that a lot since the beginning of this school year. Administratively, we're looking at our data and we're drilling down to really target our areas of growth, both at the state level and local level, because that will directly impact our educators. So we're going to work alongside of them to do that so their instruction changes as needed. We continue to dissect it. We're analyzing it so collectively we can make the moves that we need to make. I remind us all we won't remain status quo, and there has been growth. There's been observable student achievement here, and it should be celebrated because it's amazing, but it cannot and will not result in a lack of urgency for anything that we need to do moving forward. So at a glance, these are some of the data points that we'll be using in December when we talk in more detail, in much more detail than tonight, about our student outcomes. Some of the key indicators you'll see, obviously the most familiar to you are the PSSAs and the keystones. Those are the ones that are most forward-facing. And I highlight in red the areas of which our students typically take those assessments. The biggest difference, I think, for most is in 7th and 8th grade. We do have both 7th and 8th graders taking Algebra 1, which does have a direct impact on our high school outcomes and our PSSA outcomes at the middle school, which we're seeing trending right now. We also use local assessments. We use STAR. We use Acadience. We use IXL Math and ELA. And we use CBT, most specifically, a classroom diagnostic tool at our high school level. All of those are done with much more frequency than our state assessments to assess how our students are learning and how they're growing. Standardized assessments are a snapshot at a very specific time of student achievement, at a very specific time. As a team, we're looking at that very closely, and we're using that to impact how we need to make continued improvements and focus strategically on our areas to grow. As teams, we are moving forward. We have already started that data process and looking at our data outcomes, both through PVOS and our state assessments. But what that really makes us do is look ahead to possibility and action, and collectively where we can work so our students and our schools can thrive. K-3 foundation still remains a huge priority for us. We are not done with our implementation, but it allows us to continue our focus and further support our students in early literacy, which is our focus. Actively, we're also implementing a pretty comprehensive process to identify a more appropriate K-6 ELA core resource that better meets our literacy needs. And we're actively engaged in that process right now. That process included an analysis of our current materials, instructional practices, professional development, and student achievement data. Since the beginning of the summer, we started researching core programming options. And from the minute our teachers arrived until now, we have been thoroughly engaging in that process at a very high level. We have administrators, we have instructional coaches, our reading specialists, and our teacher leaders highly engaged in that process right now. We actually looked at 2 additional programs this afternoon. We're engaging with our secondary educators as well for continuity and collaboration. Even though our 9th through 12th or 7th and 8th grade teachers may not be directly impacted, they should see the process and they should see what's going on. And I also want to take a moment as we look ahead that you will see more information to come soon in an expansion of our after-school programming for grades 7 through 12. So you'll see after-school programming opportunities for our 7th and 8th grade students and our 9th through 12th grade students in ELA, math, and science, which is significantly a larger amount of opportunity than last year. Again, tonight was just a very brief overview about what we are looking at and steps we've taken thus far to address some of the needs that we identified as early as last year. And in December, you'll see a straightforward look at our fundamental ingredients of our student data. And you'll see our achievements, and you'll see our areas of growth, and even more, you'll see the actionable steps that we'll be taking to address those areas of growth. More to come in December.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Can I ask something? So I'm assuming, because I remember a few months ago, you did a great presentation on our numbers that that you'd already been reviewing since you'd first come on our administrative team with respect to PSSA trends that you had noticed in years prior to the pandemic, for example. And so I'm assuming based on what you just gave in the teaser, that's going to be, you're going to have more, because I remember you didn't have all the information yet because you were just trying to crunch it.
We are looking at that, and you can easily do a comparison
Yeah.
from the data that we have now as a result from the spring.
Right.
And do a comparison pre-pandemic,
Right.
which is really where we're focusing. I mean,
Right.
we are looking at the in-between as well.
Right.
But and you can see some really good trends there.
Because I
where-
remember it was trending down before the pandemic, which was, but it was dependent on the building, and it was
And-
a
and
little
you're-
confusing, and the participation levels were variable,
Yes.
especially in that first year, because not every student was in school to
Correct.
take and didn't take it.
And you'll see some of those same indicators, some of those same kind of variables at
Yeah.
play that you can't control. But what we're seeing, just at a very brief
Mhm.
description, is pre-pandemic to last spring. We're not seeing a huge difference of where we were at that time until now,
Mhm.
which would indicate only in some areas
Right.
that there isn't a dramatic decrease in our student achievement.
Right.
Now, there are areas within that good data
Mhm.
that we need to focus on.
Right.
Whether you had an increase in advanced but an increase in basic, that's not good
Correct.
either.
Right.
Where you lost some proficiency scores there.
Correct.
So we're getting into that really deep and looking at that, and we are looking at a comparison in that way to show you in December.
And
the
you
best
also-
way to look at that.
And you also mentioned, that there are some things to applaud. I heard, and maybe you could confirm, or I see Mr. Kinslow is here too. Sorry, I'm going to call you. That we have a large number of National Merit Scholarship semifinalists this year. I
We
heard
do.
that through
do.
I think in the past we only had one last year, and this year we have 7, I hear. Or?
I won't confirm that because I don't know it off
The
the, top
number,
of my
but-
head. But we do have an increase in those.
Which is nice.
That's
I just think
amazing.
it's great to applaud it. So maybe at that point we could
And-
hear more.
And I do, and that as well as AP testing, I want to put in there too, because I think that's an indicator of academic success that we didn't focus on perhaps last year.
Yeah.
So that's just a snapshot, and we will try to be as inclusive and comprehensive as possible. And as always, if there's things that we need to clarify or follow up on, we'll be happy to do that.
Dr. Trinkle, thank you so much. I know you mentioned, so we're using state level data and local data, which is great. Are there any holes in any of the assessments that were done over the past couple of years as a result of the pandemic?
You mean
Where
about
we're
local-
missing data?
Our local assessments or the state?
Either one.
Well,
Like, are we relying more on local assessments, or are we relying more on state data, or is it pretty balanced?
I think it intends to be balanced. I think with the local assessments, which we control when we do them and how often and how frequently we do them, I think that was probably the best data point we had last year and the year before.
Okay.
Because state assessments were either not given, or
Yeah.
when they were, you had a hybrid learning option where you didn't have everybody here.
Right.
So I
So we
think
are missing some more state level data, and
we were,
okay.
absolutely.
But we were pretty consistent with our local assessments?
Yes.
Great, that's great.
Yes. And what we are doing this year is a winter wave of Keystone testing, which we didn't do in the previous years. And we're working to do that very quickly and address some interventions, so to speak, prior to our students taking those assessments in the winter. So I believe we haven't done them in at least 2 years. Last year, I know for sure, and I believe the year before. And I think we can capture a larger number of students by doing a winter wave.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Trinkle. Excellent.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Trinkle. I do want to amplify. Yes, how about it? Yes, thank you. Thank you. I do want to amplify on one point that Dr. Trinkle made, is that we would absolutely love for board members, and I know you're busy more than ever during the course of the day, and it's sometimes challenging, but any board member who would like to come in to see foundations in action would be most welcome to do so. It is predictable in any building at any given time of day. That's when we do it. And you walk across and you see that this is universally implemented across the board, even down to the time. And so if in the near future or coming weeks or whenever you happen to have a day, just zip an email, pick the building, and we would so much like to have you. And I'm certain you'll be pleased with the outcome of the program you have allowed us to do. And this all comes through the support of the board. You've been great about supporting our efforts. We still have more to come, so we'll be talking to you this time in the budget season, but we would love to have you in the classrooms, and I think it'll be a good opportunity. I think that pretty much concludes our agenda for tonight, Mrs. Reynolds. Thank you.
I just had something. I didn't see like a new business section, but I just had a question if maybe someone could look into it before the next meeting. We've had, I know in the past, some community members speak up, as well as I've been hearing some from others that haven't commented to the board themselves. But I just wanted more information with respect to the restrictions that we have in place with dual sport registration during a season. It's a little confusing because I'm trying to understand it myself when I'm asked about it. And, I found the athletic code of conduct, which, indicates in that you can participate in more than one sport during a season, provided you have a meeting that involves at least one parent, the coaches of any sports involved, as well as the athletic director. But apparently there was some change that was made but I couldn't find that anywhere within a board policy that restricted it. So I just was curious and then it probably exists somewhere. I just don't know where to find it. But I just to understand it better and what the restrictions are and what options are for families who want to appeal it, just so I understand it.
Yes, and that would probably be about a half-hour conversation.
No, and I don't want to do it now. That's why I'm giving you a heads up as a question.
No, and we've that question has come up several times over the past numerous months, and maybe I can kind of fill you in because it's and then we could that would maybe inform a future discussion on this. Yep.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Yep.
Any visitor comments?
Thanks again. Just a reminder, I saw a shirt that said vote. So if you haven't voted yet, please get out. And if you're up at 6 o'clock tonight, there's going to be a blood moon. It's total eclipse. Won't be happening for 3 years. I just want to thank some educators as we approach American Education Week starting this Sunday. First, Miss Cephas. for the parent expertise collaboration opportunity. Lots of kids were taking selfies of pig's feet. My wife taught them to suture. My wife was voluntold to help out next year. Second, the robotics team. It was preseason, but they came in second place out of 29 teams. And as the Phillies, Doug, Paul, Kathy, no, coming in second place isn't terrible. Third, I want to give a shout out to our school counselors. When I volunteered this week at an Allentown school, I talked to our counselor. She had to obtain a master's degree in school counseling, get a qualifying score on a school counseling state test, perform supervised counseling for 60 hours. And in addition, counselors have to do a state mandated at least 300 hours internship with supervised field experience. I saw some Pennsylvania colleges require 600 hours. Hers required 700 hours. So sometimes people use teachers and counselors interchangeably. They're specialized. At the last board meeting, I went home and told my daughter, hopefully you feel you can talk to us about anything, but if you don't, please talk to a trusted adult at the school. Counselors get guidance from counseling associations. The American School Counselor Association states that while school counselors are to balance honoring important roles parents play, transgender students have the right to decide when, with whom, and to what extent to share private information. This exact language has been part of Philadelphia's board policy since 2016. Parents are concerned about their children's mental health. I think we need to advocate for mental health resources in our schools. I always encourage my students to utilize this support. School counselors teach lesson, provide counseling. They help children with career guidance, continuing ed, discipline, academics, substance abuse, depression, suicidal threats, abuse, bullying, and they are, of course, in this day and age, key components to the crisis response teams and much more. All the ways counselors provide support and help our students may not be obvious all the time, but it's no secret that our schools wouldn't be what they are without these important specialized professionals. I believe we should be doing all we can to encourage our students and families to utilize these important counseling services. Thank you.
So with that, we are adjourned at 8:28.
The over by 1 minute, Mr. Pidgeot. The